Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome, everyone. Hello, my name is Jessica Pearson, and I'm the Assistant Director of Programs for the Human Rights Institute at Columbia Law School. Thank you for joining us today for a rapid response event, Landmark Conviction for Crimes in Syria. What does it mean for justice and accountability in Syria and beyond? We organized this event within hours of a German court landmark ruling yesterday, convicting a former member of Syria's intelligence services for aiding and abetting crimes against humanity. Wednesday's decision was historic, the first court case in the world over state-sponsored torture under Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's government. So thank you all so much for being with us today. We will be taking questions from the audience, so please feel free to put those in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And I'll now turn it over to Whitney Martina Nosakari, who is a Columbia Law School LLM alum and research assistant for the International Justice Program at Human Rights Watch, and has been monitoring this case. Whitney will be leading our discussion. So welcome, Whitney, and all of the panelists.
Yes, thank you, Jessica, for inviting us for this to this discussion. Welcome everyone again from my side to today's rapid response event, one day after the German landmark conviction for serious crimes committed in Syria. We will be talking about what this verdict against IATA means for justice and accountability in Syria and beyond. As Jessica said, my name is Whitney Nosakari, and I'm a research assistant at Human Rights Watch and a PhD candidate at the Institute for International Peace and Security Law at the University of Cologne. And I'm very excited to return to Columbia Law School for this discussion on international accountability for serious crimes. So thank you to the organizers also for this event and making this discussion possible. In 2014, Russia and China blocked efforts at the Security Council to refer the situation in Syria to the International Criminal Court, the ICC. Syria is also not party to the Rome Statute, making it almost impossible to bring these situations or the situation before an international judicial forum. With these avenues for accountability for serious crimes blocked, national governments increasingly use the principle of universal jurisdiction to hold perpetrators of international crimes accountable. Together with our guests today, Anwar al-Bunni and May El-Sadani, we want to discuss the potential impact of yesterday's verdict against one former Syrian Secret Service official. And we want to talk about the principle of universal jurisdiction, the role of victims and survivors in such proceedings, potential challenges, and how this case fits into the global efforts of accountability. But first, I want to introduce our guests. I'm going to start with May. May El-Sadani is a human rights lawyer. She is currently the managing director and legal and judicial director with the Tahrir Institute for Middle East Policy. May's work has focused primarily on unpacking key legal and judicial developments in the MENA region, issues of accountability for human rights violations, and protection of lawyers at risk. May has a JD and certificate in refugees and humanitarian emergencies from the Georgetown University Law Center and a bachelor in political science from Stanford University. Welcome, May. Anwar al-Bunni is a Syrian human rights lawyer and head of the Syrian Center for Legal Studies and Research. He is also one of the founders of the Syrian Human Rights Association and of a Center for the Defense of Journalists and Political Prisoners. As a lawyer, al-Bunni was particularly involved in defending people who were prosecuted for expressing their opinions in non-violent ways, including intellectuals and human rights activists. Anwar also fights against torture in Syrian prisons and is one of the people who made the trial in Koblenz, Germany possible. We are extremely privileged to have you here with us today and speak about this verdict. And for this discussion, I will ask our panelists some questions around the issues that I just mentioned. And we will open the floor, as Jessica said, for questions in the last 10 to 15 minutes. So please feel free to put your questions in this Q&A box here in Zoom. Nice. Before we talk about the judgment specifically, I want us to talk about the broader context and history of torture in Syria's prisons. The prosecutors in Germany, in their final statements last week, described Syrian prisons as torture machines and said that the commission of these crimes had industrial dimensions. Maybe Anwar or May, can you tell us more about the pattern of systematic torture in Syria's prisons since the Arab Spring in 2011, and maybe even before that?
Please, Anwar, go ahead. There's no one better to speak about this than you.
Thank you, May. In fact, torture in Syria, it's the base element who the regime depend on it to base his dictatorship. It's not from now. It's from what this dictatorship start. Think who make the Syrians afraid and horrible, afraid, in fact. It start, I remember I defend on people who in 1977 and 78 killed under torture in Syria. And it's continued from long time until now. It's systematic from the and policy in this regime from based on it to continue and stay in the authorities, keep authorities in his hand. For that, the decision yesterday was very clear to clarify this systematic torture in the regime, and they linked it from when this regime started, from 17th. And they, in the decision also, they linked it until to the Hama massacre in 1982. That was very, very good for us as Syrians to know how much the picture, the view, it's clear in the this court view. So torture was in Syria in many ways, but after 2011 was not for have information, not against the opposition. It was for everybody. It was for revenge. I remember when they torture the people, don't ask them what they have information about make the peaceful demonstration. They torture them just, you ask freedom, that's our answer about your asking or request for freedom. So it was just for revenge from the people who asking freedom or ask for dignity. So torture, it's crimes who all the Syrians was subject of it, in fact. And it's the biggest victims for any kind of crime is torture. Until now, we suppose, not suppose from nothing, we suppose from the fact we have it from the ex-detainees or from our experience. Until now, more than 70,000 Syrians killed under torture 2011. So it's the biggest crime committed in Syria, the biggest victims who was subject for it. And it's not for the victims themselves, whole their family suffering from like this crime. Beside, after they survive, the crimes continue with them, with their bodies, with their soul. So it didn't happen until if they survive and go out jail. It's continue with this crime. So May, you can continue also.
Yeah,
You have expert.
Thank you, Anwar. There's not much I would add. I would just underscore a point that Anwar made about how torture was systematic. It was a statewide policy, and it was used as a tool of punishment, but also as a tool of reprisal, and certainly a tool to silence individuals as well. And I also want to emphasize not only physical torture, but mental torture as well. And the fact is that there was no space for accountability for torture, certainly inside Syria, and that unfortunately remains to be the case, whether it's accountability even in the form of reporting or documenting that torture. And we see lawyers, civil society organizations, folks who are on the ground trying to tell those stories being arrested and tortured themselves, or the limited accountability that we would see even in the international space. And I think it's only fitting that this trial, this verdict, revolved around the issue of torture, because it is such a central part of the Syrian story.
Yeah, thank you for that. And the court actually established yesterday that at least from April 2011, there was a widespread and systematic attack against the civilian population, and emphasized that the Syrian Secret Service played a huge role in committing these crimes. So I want to move on and to the one point that you mentioned, May, about accountability, mechanisms of accountability. So in yesterday's press conference, the German prosecutor stated that this verdict is a sign to perpetrators of serious crimes that these crimes won't go unpunished. May, with international avenues like the ICC or hybrid international courts blocked, how does this principle of universal jurisdiction serve international efforts for accountability? And can you maybe tell us a bit more about the other international attempts to address this decade-long conflict in Syria?
Sure. So for those who don't know, the idea of universal jurisdiction emanates from the fact that some crimes are just so horrific that the entire community, the international community as a whole, should have an interest in stopping these crimes. And so universal jurisdiction allows countries, even those that have no direct connection to the crime itself or to the perpetrators or defendants, to prosecute those cases. Each country implements universal jurisdiction or the broader extraterritorial jurisdiction to various degrees, but Germany is one of the most open environments, I would say the most pure, they say, universal jurisdiction laws in place. And so it's no surprise, again, that we see this first verdict coming from Germany. But the fact is that verdict doesn't exist on its own, right? The reason we had this verdict is for years, Syrian lawyers, documentarians, civil society organizations, journalists have been documenting the Syrian story. They've been collecting evidence. They've been reporting on it. They've been compiling it, analyzing it. So for a decade, you've had this immense amount of information being collected, largely by civil society organizations, many of them Syrian. Increasingly, the international community got involved, and now there are mechanisms like the IIIM that was established by the UN, which again works with civil society to compile cases, so that when there is a possibility to prosecute these cases, whether in contexts like the German one or otherwise, these cases can proceed. But this idea of universal jurisdiction, I think, is really is part of the Syrian story. For many of us in the international law space, universal jurisdiction was a fascinating concept, and we had seen it in practice, but very rarely. It is Syrian lawyers and Syrian documentarians and international lawyers who worked with them who actually realized universal jurisdiction can be a solution for the failure of the international community to leverage things like the International Criminal Court to create hybrid tribunals. And so universal jurisdiction became strong thanks to the efforts of the Syrians and those invested in the Syrian space. And I expect that it will continue to remain strong and perhaps inspire other communities who have no recourse domestically or via international systems to consider universal jurisdiction. That being said, of course, universal jurisdiction has not been implemented to the same degree in countries around the world. And so you have different degrees of implementation, if you will. And the final thing I'll add also is that universal jurisdiction as a principle is only as strong as the laws that implement it. as well as the mechanisms in place in these countries. There needs to be political will to adopt universal jurisdiction. There needs to be investigations and resources from the state to actually allow for universal jurisdiction. And there needs to be evidence collection. So kind of when we think of the role the international community can play, all the way from supporting organizations that are documenting crimes to passing laws that implement legislation to empowering investigative bodies to creating structural investigations, there's a role for all of us.
Yes, and one of the Syrian lawyers is here with us today, Anwar Al-Buni. The reason why this case in Koblenz could take place is due, to the survivors and civil society organizations who fought to hold these perpetrators accountable. You are one of these people. How exactly did we get here? Can you tell us more about how investigations in Germany were initiated and how and who was involved on a local, regional, and maybe also international level?
I want to first add some idea about what May said about the universal jurisdiction. There is two levels of universal jurisdiction. In fact, there is a low level who based on the agreement, international agreement, like international agreement against torture or against sexual violence or like that. This give any country who agree with this agreement who prosecute the suspect if he exists on its land. So if any suspect or criminal exists in Netherlands or in US or in UK, and there is evidence against him, he tortured or committed crimes against sexual violence or any subject of the agreement, we can prosecute him. But the high level of the universal jurisdiction who give the prosecutor authorities to prosecute with crimes committed outside and until the suspect or perpetrators didn't exist on this land. And this, like this wide universal jurisdiction exists just in Germany and recently in Sweden and Norway. So for that, we submitted 4 cases in front of federal prosecutor in Germany from 2017 against 27 high-ranking officers still in Syria, including Bashar al-Assad himself and his brother. Now, all of them subject for investigation for fights against them with crimes against humanity, based not just in torture, in execution outside law, like Saydnaya prison, and by excuse the people by field military court. And also we submitted case in front of the Sweden prosecutor and also in Norway prosecutor. In total, we targeted 60 high-ranking officers responsible about torture, kill under torture and killed outside law, and all of them now maybe there is arrest warrant issued against part of them, like the arrest warrant against Jamil Hassan, who's still in Syria, but there is arrest warrant, international arrest warrant against him, and Ali Mamlouk, the head of national office, all of them still in Syria, but there is now they are wanted by international Interpol. Next, many people and law study asking why we cannot prosecute the torture criminals by torture in front of the Syrian court, while the criminal law in Syria torture it's binding. I want to explain the Syrian law. In Syrian law, there is for sure a subject or article spoke about punishment any people committed torture crime. The problem, there is laws also give full immunity to the policeman, to the military, to the security guy from prosecute from any reason. We need permission from the head of the security or from the defense minister before we can, the general attorney can prosecute them with any crime. So they have full immunity, not from now, it's from long time. If they killed my son in front of me from long time, I can't prosecute them because I need the permission from the head of the security to make a case against them. For that, the one way who we can follow it was the universal jurisdiction. Everybody knows ICC closed, and there is gap between international crime law, criminal law, and apply it in the countries who don't sign the agreement, Roma agreement, convention. So the universal jurisdiction came to fill this gap, and really I think it's more stronger from ICC, more stronger as a decision, and it's for victims' will, not by international will as ICC. ICC under control of politics. The Security Council can cancel any case in front of it, and or stop it, and stop funding, and it's under control of the politics. While the National Justice Authority, it's independent, and just the victim will who can move and can stop or continue any case. Back to your question.
And Anwar, just before you answer,
yeah,
just sorry to interrupt. It is sometimes hard to understand you. Maybe can you turn off your camera and let us see if we understand you better then?
Yeah. Yeah, it's now better, the sound.
Yeah, go ahead, and we're going to see.
Yeah, back to we as from when I came to Germany in 2014, I start to look how we can apply some justice for Syria, and you know that all the crimes committed in Syria, sometimes live on the air, video live was. And the regime, in fact, was want to publish the videos and picture of the victims who torture them. He want to make Syrian afraid. So they mentioned to send this video about they torture the Syrians, the demonstration, and kill them under torture. They mentioned that to make all of Syrian in afraid and stop to move. Or continue moving. So when it's all the way close, and I arrived to Germany and start to look any way to have some justice, and we have really wonderful partner. I found ECCHR, European Center for Constitutional Human Rights. We start together in 2016 to prepare file. And when we submitted many files in front of the prosecutor, Anwar R and Iyad Gharib came. It started with Anwar R, in fact. It started because this guy who arrested me in 2006 personally, and I know him personally as a security officer. So start with in 2018, and we helped the prosecutor with 12 victims who I know him personally because I defended them when they were in detention, and I helped them as lawyer to when they go out, and I know conditioners. So I contact him and achieve them to the prosecutor, and based on this 12 testimony from victims who was tortured in the same branch when this Anwar was head of the investigation division in this branch. The prosecutor issued arrest warrant or arrested Anwar R and start this case. And Iyad Gharib was different. Iyad Gharib, he came to Germany at 2018. He gave all his information. He confessed, in fact, with all what he did. And the problem, or maybe bad luck or another, he gave his testimony while investigation start against Anwar R and branch specific. So the prosecutor find him involved with this file, and he let his situation involve with this case. After a while, the prosecutor find Iyad, he maybe will be witness more than victims, more than suspect. So he released him, in fact. But the court, the appeal decision, no, he must to arrest, and the court will decide if he innocent or witness or suspect.
Yeah,
but
and
in the end, yes, they sentenced him with 4.5 years.
And that's very fascinating to hear how this trial actually really started. And as many of you know, yesterday the court issued its verdict and sentenced Iyad A, a former Syrian intelligence officer, to 4.5 years in prison for aiding and abetting torture and deprivation of liberty. So maybe let's talk about this verdict. What is why is this verdict against Iyad A significant? Why is it so significant? What can we learn from Koblenz? If you could maybe tell us your opinion on that.
Sure, I think there are a number of things we can learn from Koblenz and the verdict. And certainly I think it's helpful to start by just saying how significant this is, or how rather unprecedented as a first. As you had alluded to earlier, this was the first time that a former member of the Syrian intelligence had been convicted of an international crime. The court itself, a criminal court, has confirmed that the acts of the Syrian regime amount to crimes against humanity, something that many in the advocate community have been saying for years now. And it was also the first time that a Syrian regime official was taken to court and tried for torture. So imagine, from a survivor and victim-centric perspective, finally being able to look your torturer in the eye and share and become a part of the historical record and to document and tell your story. For me, this is really what is special about this case. The fact that for decades, like I've said before, Syrians and non-Syrians have been collecting evidence of mass atrocity. They've been compiling it, reviewing it, analyzing it, and this trial and this verdict yesterday is kind of a testament of how that evidence could possibly be used. It's certainly not the only way, and there's extreme power and importance given to documentation in and of itself, memorialization, the writing of history. All of these are forms of transitional justice that are necessary alongside prosecutions like the one yesterday. But it's certainly powerful even from a survivor and victim perspective, being able to go to court and to tell your stories in the face of so much erasure. Particularly in the Syrian context, we've seen Russian trolls and otherwise kind of attempt to undo the history of the Syrian revolution and the peaceful nature of folks protesting and then being faced with some of the most horrific mass atrocities of our time. So being able to have an official court platform to tell your stories, to face your torture in court, and to see your story become a part of the court and historical record, that is momentous in and of itself. And at the same time, it brings back accountability into a conversation that has increasingly become about geopolitical issues, political larger conversation, but that larger conversation has often left out accountability and justice when accountability and justice are necessary to any political solution. So just being reminded about how all of this started, why it's important, and what Syrians have been asking for from the very beginning is essential. So I think even reporting on this verdict, having the opportunity to hear from someone like Anwar, to hear from others Syrians who were in the courtroom yesterday, reflect on how they feel and what this means to them, that is all essential. And it should have been happening throughout the last decade. But unfortunately, it's something we've gotten away from. So from a narrative perspective, it's extremely important that we continue to hear from Syrians. And that's why these efforts like this are so important. And then one final thing on the significance of this that I'll also add from an international legal perspective. I think cases and trials like this help us think through difficult questions. Is the international legal community doing what it can to support survivors? Are international laws and mechanisms in place strong enough? When do they fail? When do they let us down? But when do they also bring some semblance of justice? So I think thinking through this, having trials that force us to grapple with these questions, even questions that I know folks are very interested about, like, should we be holding people who defect from the regime accountable? Should low-level perpetrators be, do they have a choice when they've committed a crime? The answers to these questions, people will vary on the answers, but the conversations themselves and the fact that we grapple with them as an international legal community, I guarantee, will bring about stronger mechanisms that can protect and uphold what survivors and victims have been asking for.
Yes, thank you. Anwar, do you want to add what is
in fact, yeah, I agree with May about what she said. She spoke from the side of victims, and it's so important with any trial to see the side of victims who be part of this court and litigation. But we have another goal, in fact. When we start this trial, or open trial, or against Anwar R, I don't look for Anwar R or Iyad A as a target. I look far of that. I look to put all the regime, all the systematic crimes committed in Syria in this cage, to appear for all the world what happened in Syria, and that give me the strong for main goal, in fact, that it's all the criminals against humanity feel comfortable because they have immunity in their country. And besides, they have comfortable if they have one of the support from the 5 Security Council. If they have one guarantee with veto, that means they will be for their life have full immunity to commit all this crime. For that, and for everybody, the experience for the history tell us bad story about justice. The history give us a story about people who make agreement and how much they committed the crimes. The international community gives them a Nobel Prize for peace, like Colombia. The biggest criminals be hero at last, and that give green card to any criminals, to any dictatorship, to kill how much they want, and they will have maybe Bashar al-Assad dream to have peace Nobel for peace prize for peace in in the future. Beside the political solution or military solution at last, who decide the road of the justice? Maybe they will have general amnesty and everybody, okay, go to home and it's okay. Like what happened in Lebanon, and criminals be leaders or in other country. So all the experience from the history tell us about give green card for dictatorship to do what they want, and at last they will survive, like Pinochet as example. And more others. I will not account all the stories. For that, my goal to make another experience, another choice. I don't look for Syria and Syria's future. I look if, like these people survive Bashar al-Assad and his biggest criminals, if they survive in any way under political agreement, under propaganda, we want to stop everything and we want to take it by our behind us, it will be crime against whole the world. It will be give criminals in other, in Iran, in Gulf, in Turkish, in Egypt, in Algeria, in Venezuela, in any country others. Okay, I can kill how much I can commit it, how much I want from at last I will survive. So my goal to give experience and give warning to all of that. Immunity time is enough. It's over. No way, any way to depend somebody protect you in front of the Security Council. No way to depend about you have immunity or impunity in front of your country. There is no way we can touch you. Besides, I want to be sure, like these criminals in Syria, will not be able in any way, under any headline, to be part of the political solution or from our future. Because when they will be under suspect and charged with the crimes against humanity, no way to any country, to any politic, any propaganda, any way to deal with them in the future, because the law will stop any deal with them, because now legally they be suspect with the crime against humanity. And that my goal, in fact. I don't want to catch them now, all of them, and put them in jail. I want to be sure first they will be outside our future and our children's future.
Thank you to both for summarizing why this verdict is so important. And I think May and Anwar, you really summarize it. Like this verdict is so important because it is the first time that that a court addresses state torture in Syria, and at the same time it sends a sign that these crimes will and should not go unpunished. And before we move on to the questions from the audience, I just saw we have a lot of very interesting questions. I want to
add something, just 1 minute.
Yes, please.
It's historical step for both two sides. It's historical step because it's the first time one from the regime side, from this systematic machine for torture, be in the court, and that's first time in the Syria history. But it's so important for the world because also it's first time in the history one of this systematic torture charged while the authorities still in power. The state is still exists. It's never happened. Some trial happened after the people go out, the authority go, and the authority itself it's go, and in solution or in any way, whole the system will done And after that, we can follow these people here like Nazis or like others. Now the authority is still, and it still have power. And while that, we excuse them, all of them we excuse them. It's never happened in the history, in fact. And that will be give more strong to the human rights lawyers in whole the world to take away how they can defend about themselves in front of like this dictatorship.
Yeah, just as you said, unlike other historic trials like in Nuremberg or the ICTY or ICTR, the trial in Koblenz took place while the conflict in Syria is still ongoing. So maybe what are some of the challenges of conducting such trials in countries miles away from where crimes were committed? Maybe May, could you tell us what you think about that?
Sure. I think there are a few challenges. One, resources, certainly, oftentimes because the investigations are happening in a different place or the evidence has not been fully transferred or collected or analyzed, there's a resource or a sort of an investment that needs to happen. And we're starting to see it now with the creation of mechanisms, the investment of resources, what have you, to make sure that there is a safe way to look at the evidence, to safeguard that evidence, to analyze that evidence, and ultimately to decide how to use it. And we're seeing this a little bit. I know there's a question about the IIM. We're seeing this a little bit with the IIM, which is now working with civil society to put together potential case files that can then be taken to different courts when the opportunity allows for those courts to hear these cases. And so the mechanisms are starting to be built, but it's a constant investment need. We need to be investing in civil society. We need to be investing in the technology and all of that. Certainly there is a challenge when it comes to keeping the attention of the international community, especially with Syria, where we've seen a lot of fatigue, if you will, despite the fact that justice and accountability are so central and so important. Less and less people are paying attention, and so less and less of the everyday public understands why this is so important. And so that, again, is the role of civil society, journalists, policy, government, to be explaining the importance of this, to be tying it to any political conversation or political solution. What we're talking about here is not a marginal issue. It's a central issue to the future of Syria. And if it's not in every conversation that's happening about Syria, if we're not talking about accountability, then we're missing a key part. Because like Anwar was saying, the regime is still in power. And so holding that regime accountable is necessary when you're thinking about the future of the country. So that's another angle there as well. And then certainly also from a political will perspective, universal jurisdiction is a relatively new concept in this international community. And so countries hesitate at times to fully incorporate universal jurisdiction into their own legal systems. They worry about what it means even for holding their own individuals accountable when they have committed war crimes. They are not always certain how this feeds into their interests, but we're here to kind of say that this is an essential going towards this and strengthening universal jurisdiction, I would say, and the options for this are essential to the future of the international community, not only for Syria, but because, like Anwar was saying, of the message it sends for impunity for all other actors, well beyond the Syrian context. If we don't hold the regime that committed some of the worst mass atrocities of our modern day accountable, then what does this mean for future contexts and conflicts and ongoing situations, including Yemen and otherwise? So I think that's how we should be thinking about it. But there is a transition that needs to happen, a translation even, if you will, from lawyers, advocates, to contextualize this and make sure that these conversations are happening everywhere. And then a final logistical note that I think is important. The vast majority of the victims do not speak German. There is a responsibility on courts and on government officials to make sure that trial proceedings can be translated, that victims have the ability to listen, to understand, to know what's going on. This is their story. And the fact that it's happening on German land is wonderful because there's no other place for it to be happening right now. But that also means that those in power and positions of influence have a responsibility to make sure court proceedings are understandable, can be followed in Arabic and otherwise. And that's also a place that the donor community and the NGO community can always do better. We're seeing really excellent efforts by the folks, for example, at ECCHR, at SJAC, at Branch 251 to produce content in Arabic and make sure that those who are affected most by these issues can engage in the discourse, but more needs to be done.
Thank you very much for your thoughts on this. And if Anwar, if you don't want to add anything, I would turn to the questions from the audience. We do.
Yeah, maybe the answer of question will more thing, and if there is anything else, we will speak about.
Sure. Okay. So we have one interesting question, and it's regarding the fact that Iyad A, who was convicted yesterday, defected in January 2012. He stated that this was the earliest time that he could leave Syria, leave the Syrian government. And we have one question here from one audience member. She's interested in hearing your thoughts on the issue of defectors, as defectors were among the accused, Iyad A. Did the Koblenz court have a specific way of dealing with defectors, and what are your personal thoughts on this, and how can
it's so interesting question, you know, and it's was part of speak with the Syrians who their opinion, this guy is defector, and also Raslan go out Syria 2012, and my opinion first, the accountability will not depend about this the background of the suspect, if he opposition or authority or his religion, or because there is argument also about he is Sunnis and the authorities Alawi. The accountability and the justice will not look for the background of the criminals, if he political side or religion or ethnic also, because also we have problem with Kurdish and Arab, and there is targeted Kurdish or Arab or Sunnis, you know. Justice is don't look, there is crime, there is criminals, there is evidence, must to be held. Justice must to be held. That what we speak about it. Defect. He, in fact, Iyad, he defect and give all information, but he not innocent. Iyad was member of the security state from 15 years before. And he used his authority for committed crimes in society and other. We don't look for those crimes anyway. German authority look for crimes against humanity. That means after 2011. But he is not innocent and clear. But anyway, they committed. They sentenced him as his action. He arrested and delivered 30 detainees to the branch 251, and he know very well they will torture and they will kill under torture. And the court notes that. Notice he have a chance to defect before, and he have a chance to don't share with this, but he continue for more than 6 months, and we have witness also around him who give their testimony that he was agree with what he did before he defect. He wasn't upset or want to angry or want to run away as he can as possible. So we will not depend about if he defected or no. We look for evidence. And I saw some question about the evidence. Yes, the evidence in front of the court was based on the testimony of victims who proved very well by Caesar photo, the photo from Caesar who escaped, and with photo for 11 detainees' body who killed under torture. So the victim story very clear or match with the bodies of the detainees who killed under torture. Besides, we with many Syrian organization and international organization, the reports of Human Rights Watch, of Amnesty International, beside CIJA, also provide the court with documents who prove that Anwar R himself signed some paper. He know what happened, and he know these people killed and transferred their body to the mass grave. Beside all of that, there is document proof systematic of this torture from the head of the regime, from Bashar Assad himself. There is a paper signed by him and the National Security Office. So it's not about, but the best evidence was the testimony of the victim, who at least 2 of them recognize Anwar R with authentication, recognize him, and 6 of them recognize his voice, and he refused to give test of his voice to be sure that the victims, to be sure he is or not. He refused to give test for his voice. So yes, the evidence is so strong. The fact will not give any immunity or impunity. We don't speak if we are as opposition or as human rights against this regime, these criminals, we will protect the criminals who come to us. That means we confess Bashar Assad have all right to protect the criminals who belong to him, and that will not happen. That means we drop the justice beside, and we continue as politic people as any experts before, and that will be horrible for justice and for the future of our country and our people.
Thank you, Anwar. May, do you want to add anything to that? No. Then since we have 4 minutes left, I would take also one final question. Maybe May, if you know more about that. We have one question, and Natasha Fain is asking, what has been the response to this decision thus far from Syrian citizens still living in Syria? More broadly, what are the people of Syria fighting for with respect to accountability for human rights violations?
I think Anwar is obviously best positioned to speak a lot more about the Syrian community and what the discourse has been like. However, I'll just say something very quickly. I think that it's one of the remarkable efforts that have come in this accountability space have been the efforts of families of those who have been detained or disappeared. In the last few years, but certainly in the last few months as well, we've seen families of the disappeared and the detained from different organizations and those outside of organizations come together and announce a truth and justice charter, which highlights some of the key demands that Syrian families, Syrian victims have been making from the very beginning, and to make sure that these demands are articulated in the justice discourse. But this is not directly relevant to this case, but it's important context. It's important context to be including individuals who have been directly affected by the regime in the justice conversation, because justice is complicated. People want different things depending on who they are, the type of individuals they are. And I think our responsibility in the international legal community is to support those different forms of justice. Some people will want to see prosecutions, both in order to hold individuals accountable, but also, like Anwar said, to hold the regime at large accountable, or to stop impunity even outside of Syria, across the world. Some people will want to document and tell their story. Some people will want to make sure that the history books have been recorded in a way that reflects the reality on the ground. All of those are legitimate and forms of justice, and our responsibility as an international legal community is to accommodate for those different forms.
I want to add, I am sure, besides some argument about, as I spoke, there is defector or Sunnis or like this argument, but I am sure all the Syrians support the accountability, including the Syrians inside the regime area. I think I spoke about Syrians, about people. I don't speak about criminals who involved with these crimes in some side, in the both side or the several side. In fact, there is no just both side in Syria. There is several side. All of them committed crimes against war crimes. But crimes against humanity, it's specific for the regime anyway, because it's belong always crimes against humanity belong to systematic state, to systematic government, not war crime. But all of the parties and specific weapon party committed crime, war crime. So every Syrians people who supports accountability. We received many letters from inside Syria and from outside support accountability. As I said, it's besides some argument about the target these people or like that or because they defector or they are belong to this religion or like that. But everybody support, I am sure, and we try with our program to spread the education of accountability to the Syrian to be understand more how it's going on, how it's continuing. And we know the accountability, transition and justice in Syria in the future, it's take a big place. And the transition and justice, it's not to account the criminals. It's accounting the criminals. It's part of the transition and justice. We target from it to rebuild the social peace, to build memories, to change the laws, to prevent have like this issue in our future, in our generation. So it's several. We put to plan for transitional justice from 2012 for Syria, while that times nobody speak about transitional justice or transitional period. Yes, it will be when we use universal jurisdiction. I want to be clarified this point. We don't need from Germany or France or any country with universal jurisdiction to take place or the universal the transitional justice in Syria. We need from using this to send message. I know it's no way to bring all the cases about the crimes committed in Syria to put it in front of the prosecutor in Germany or in France or in Sweden or Norway. It's crazy. Nobody can handle with these huge cases, and he cannot investigate inside Syria. So we want to send message first of all to the criminals inside Syria and outside. Immunity time, it's over, and you will never find any safe place hide you from your history and your action and what you committed in Syria. This is the first and important thing. We will not continue with hundreds of cases, just make cases and send it to the prosecutor. No, we need to send message, and this message, I think it's delivered to everybody who must to be.
Thank you, Anwar and May, for talking about the significance of the judgment that was issued yesterday from by the Higher Regional Court in Koblenz, and for discussing chances and challenges of universal jurisdiction and the chance of universal jurisdiction to fill this gap in international law that we see right now. The quest for justice in Syria is not over. I would like again to thank the panelists for their time and their dedication. Please follow Anwar al-Buni and May al-Sadani and other Syrian activists, lawyers, and journalists and support them in their tremendous work. You can follow our panelists on Twitter at Sadani and at Anwar al-Buni. Please support them. Thank you very much. Take care, everyone.
Dear, and thank you everybody be with us. Really, I appreciate. I am so happy to be with you, all of you. Low communication and thank you for Columbia University to organize this meeting. I am so happy to be with you.
Thank you, and thanks Anwar for sharing the stage with me. It was a privilege, and thanks for all the work that you do, and to Columbia for hosting.